okay. Oh, okay. All righty. Josh, my man, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing?
All right. Thank you so much for joining FAMU House um,
Mm-hmm.
and our alumni spotlight. And so I'm going to give you the floor to talk about yourself and your journey. And afterwards, feel free to have a Q&A session. And so
All
I'll go
right.
ahead and yield to you.
All right. Well, good day to you all. It is 3 p.m. here in Boston, Massachusetts, where I currently am. I'm honored, pleased, and privileged to be here today to speak to you all. I came to FAMU from Orlando, the Orlando area, because I went to so many white schools. I wanted a break. I was able to go to a FAMU showcase around Florida Classic weekend, and I fell in love. I love being on the set on Fridays. I love my fried chicken Wednesdays. I love going to Club Coleman, right? I was actually in a fraternity called Gamma Phi Alpha. That meant GPA. The frat house was Club Coleman. I studied English and political science. Dr. Kemp and Dr. King Pedroso were very influential for me in the English department, as well as the late uh, Lyndon Rogers. He just transitioned last year, right? I was able to be a resident assistant at Gibbs Hall. I was able, through Florida A&M University, to be a part of a program called Camp Adventure, in which I was able to be a day camp counselor in Germany, Hawaii, and Japan as a day camp counselor to Army dependent children, Foreign Service dependent children, and Japanese youth. The FAMU Youth Development Opportunities led me to apply to a program called City Year in Boston. It's similar to, Teach for America or Peace Corps. I was able to support Black and Brown youth in Boston public schools through attendance, behavior, and coursework initiatives. Through City Year Boston, I met social workers and other folks who encouraged me to go for my MSW instead of my JD. I had this lofty idea. I was gonna go to FAMU undergrad, go to like maybe UF, go to like Georgia State or something, and become a lawyer because everybody wanted to be a lawyer at that time, right? But nonetheless, with the support that I got from people in City Year, I was able to just apply to one grad school and change my mind from going from the legal route to the social work route. And I chose Boston College. At Boston College, it was the total opposite of FAMU. Boston College is in an upscale suburb of Boston called Chestnut Hill. It's like where people from like the Red Sox and the Patriots and a lot of old money, uh, New England money, I should say. That's where they reside in that area, right? People at Boston College were not warm. The weather was cold, and the campus had lots of white supremacy. I was able to provide mental health support for Black and Brown youth in Boston as a grad school intern. At Boston College, I met other Black and Brown males who I also felt isolated while in the grad school program in a white female dominated profession. Once I graduated, I returned to my original home of Brooklyn, New York. I was able to provide case management, group therapy, individual therapy, conduct mental health assessments, and provide home visits in Brooklyn, New York, and Harlem, New York. While I lived in Brooklyn, I kept in touch with my Boston College Graduate School of Social Work friends that I now run Melanated Social Work with. I was the person that named our collective Melanated Social Work. We're three African American, one Filipinx, uh, male social worker, all men of color, all Black and brown men. So I was just like, we're melanated. We practice social work. We have our licenses in social work. We have our masters in social work. Let's call it melanated social work. And I thought of MSW, right? Master of Social Work or melanated social work, right? I thought of it in a wordplay type of sense. And we started we knew each other from grad school and we had a peer supervision group in which we were able to, you know, discuss what it's like to be black or brown and male in the field of social work. At the time, I was in Brooklyn. Another one of us was in Washington, D.C. Another one of us was in Philadelphia. And another one of us was in Oakland, California, right? But nonetheless, I named us, started the Instagram. I hope if you are not following our Instagram right now, please go to your phone, go to Melanated Social Work, just type it in. You can even go to our website, melanatodsocialwork.com. I'm gonna give y'all a little minute to follow up on that. Melanated Social Work on Instagram and melanatodsocialwork.com. Let y'all marinate and do that. Um, so, nonetheless, we started an Instagram about 3 years ago. We started a podcast 2 years ago. Since then, we've been actually named the recent distinguished alumni of the Boston College School of Social Work. We've trained the National Association of Social Work last week, right? We've also been able to speak at such universities of social well, schools of social work from Columbia University. So I know y'all know this school, the University of Texas. We've been able to speak to different therapists, organizations from Maine to Spain, Alaska to Nebraska. But no, really, we've been able to interview and have people on the podcast that were Black therapists in Australia, the first NFL in-house therapist and clinical social worker for the Carolina Panthers. We've had Stick from Dead Prez. If you don't know about Dead Prez, they started at FAMU. We've been able to have professors from the University of Toronto, uh, hip hop therapists from San Diego, and the list goes on and on. We continue to conduct healing spaces. We continue to facilitate dialogue about equity, diversity, inclusion, mental health, immigration, sexual orientation, all the isms, right, under the tutelage of, white supremacy. We've been also able to, discuss what it's like to disable, toxic masculinity, right? A lot of us, let's be honest, I got to be honest, a lot of us as, black men, we do enable a lot of sexism, a lot of misogynoir, which is the hatred of black women, a lot of homophobia, a lot of transphobia. We've been able to talk to, other black and brown men to disable those things and be better able to use their privilege in some way to make it better for many black identities and many brown identities. Uh, yeah, that's what I have for right now. And I know probably maybe people may have questions or want to talk to me about mental health or whatever the case may be. But yeah,
Thank you so much for sharing. And I'll probably do the same thing that I did with Aisha, just ask you a few questions. Um, just based off of the last one that you just talked about is um, of recognizing that there is some privilege with being a black man.
hmm
And so, how do you have any tips for folks that maybe don't really know much about that topic? Like, how could they ease into that in order to have a conversation with someone who may be displaying those type of tendencies? How they
hmm
could potentially talk them down and to kind of get
hmm
them to see, hey, you know what? Maybe you want to try to approach that in a different way.
right. Well, first, what you can do is go to our podcast. That was a podcast like a year ago. So we have a podcast about that, and we've discussed it ad nauseum in different places. So start off the podcast. For one, I don't. I think it depends upon your identity. I don't. I don't think it's obligation for those that are black and those that are not heterosexual and those that are not cisgendered and those that do not identify as femme. Uh, whether you are aligned with the sex you were assigned at birth, or if you are non-binary, or if you are transgender, I don't know if you want to have that conversation with the average black man that's cisgender, which is your sex assigned at birth,
Mhm.
and somebody who's heterosexual. That's more of what somebody like me should be doing. I am not perfect. I have made my mistakes and saying things and actions and such. So, with that being said, somebody like me is able to kind of hopefully engage other Black men who are not quite there in their journey. Because a lot of times, if it was a Black person that was non cis and non heterosexual confronting or discussing this with somebody,
Hmm.
this could put them in harm's way. And I don't want to do that,
Mm, okay.
right? Because there's so much, violence against Black men to Black women, so much to Black men to those that are trans. And I'm not here for the Black on Black crime thing because it's all about proximity, right? So I just want to make that clear because you know there's a lot of stuff going on in our with our Asian brothers and sisters right now, uh,
Yeah.
and a lot of anti-Asian violence compartmentalized to that. You go in an Asian community, you go in a non-Black Latino community, you go in white communities or whatever, you're gonna find a lot of times the cisgender heterosexual type thing, regardless of race,
Mm,
is a common narrative.
yeah.
So I think really where you start is, talking to young men in general, right, about their role and their position and their privilege and how to respect, those that are not like them, right? And show love. And I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, women have to carry themselves this way or women have to carry themselves that way. That's not, it shouldn't be like that for a woman or somebody who is not cisgender or heterosexual to carry themselves a certain type of way because men need to carry themselves first accountable for their actions and their deeds. And it starts as a young person. I wish there were older men that were there to talk to me and engage with me about those things, because you may say something or you just never know and you could put harm to folks. So I think it's somebody like me to have those conversations. And if they aren't, like I know we're going to talk about mental health, but mental health is just as important as you going to get your physical yearly,
Mm,
right? It's
yes.
just as important as getting your eyes checked yearly. It's just as important as getting your teeth checked.
Yeah.
Or if you have a car, making sure your car, your realignment, your oil is changed. Mentally, you need that. You may not have to do it all the time, but you need at least a checkup here and there. And as Black people, as no matter where you are in the diaspora, African American, if you're from the continent, the Caribbean, wherever you are, there's a common trauma that we have around the world. We have a podcast episode coming out with a Hampton, a Hampton grad,
Nice.
Dr. Tanya Sharp. She's at the University of Toronto, and she's discussed how, you know, high blood pressure, strokes, a lot of stuff that we as Black people deal with in America
Mm,
happens in Toronto. Toronto's not that far away from, Boston and New York, right?
right.
You go to London, it's the same thing. You go to Paris, it's the same thing. You go even to like people don't. There's a lot of Black people out in like Australia, like Sydney and Melbourne. They're dealing with the same stuff. So there's a certain amount of trauma we as Black people have dealt with globally,
Yeah.
but in the United States, since we just need to, it's been hard, right? Because the American Psychiatric Association, who has the diagnostical and statistical manual for mental disorders, the DSM, right? That has been used to put Black people in jail, to increase the prison industrial complex, to
Yeah.
be homophobic, to be transphobic, to take parts of Black men's brains out in Mississippi up until the 1960s. My parents were born in the 60s. So there's a lot of decolonization and fear and stigma in whatever Black community that you come from. But it's about people like me who were able to like hopefully destigmatize and discuss like, no, that's very true. Like there's a book called Medical Apartheid, and it discusses like in Boston, there's a street called Boylston Street, and that he's named after the street is named after a doctor, and the doctor used malaria treatments on Black people before he used it on anybody else. We know about Tuskegee, right?
Mhm.
So it's and what I was taught in grad school too is that HIPAA, right? Your level of communication and stuff with like medical providers or what have you, when you sign that stuff off, part of that came out of the Tuskegee experiment. So
Wow.
there's a history to these things, but again, it's about people like me who have the degrees and licenses and the platforms to give the history, would be able to give context and normalize going to counseling, right? Or therapy, because counseling is Burger King, therapy is filet mignon. So let me say that, right?
Oh, please break
Um,
that down because I didn't. I always kind of struggle with the difference between counseling and because I feel like some people are licensed and some people aren't. Like, so what are those different?
well, first and foremost, like counseling is, so I got this from a book called Black Man in a White Coat, and it's about a black male psychiatrist, and he just used it, and I thought it was kind of fly. But counseling is just like kind of old language, like how probably we used to be called Negro or colored, but it got adapted and something better, maybe black or African American, whatever. It's just their next rendition of what it is, right? Also, if you're going to somebody who is not licensed in anything mental health, you can go to them for like coaching or being a mental advocate. But if you have a license in, like, I have a license in social work, if you're a license in psychology, mental health, whatever the case may be, you have a set of ethics and accountability
Hmm.
to hold yourself up to. And if something goes wrong, you're held accountable. Whereas a mental health advocate or people who not might not have their licenses yet, they won't be held accountable. So if something happens, God forbid, somebody, I don't know, something God forbid happens,
Yeah.
you can get you, somebody can sue you. Somebody can sue me or my brothers who actually have the licenses. People who just are mental health advocates, like that's cool, but you shouldn't be in a position in the same place as somebody who's licensed in mental health.
So that also kind of translates to, I guess, what they have in the finance industry, where you have like banks that have fiduciary responsibility
Mm-hmm.
versus just like an advisor, which even in advisors they have to go through certain certifications and that kind of stuff. Thank you for clearing that up. And I
Mm-hmm.
just want to quickly piggyback. So we have like another 10 minutes or so. Quickly piggyback on the history thing and also tying it
Mm-hmm.
back into FAMU in
Mm-hmm.
terms of kind of knowing where you came from, because it was
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to hear about that HIPAA thing coming out of the Tuskegee Air, not Tuskegee Airmen, but Tuskegee
Tuskegee
Explorer.
experiment. Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting to hear that, and then also the correlation that you talked about, Black people in Toronto, Black people in the Caribbean, and
Mm-hmm.
wherever Black people insert planet, right, wherever
Mm-hmm.
you are on the planet. And so that just always makes me think about like that muscle memory thing with all that trauma. It just kind of continues on, and I just remember um taking African American experience in Perry.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those things, like I just learned about just all the graphic and gruesome things that they did to Black people,
Mm-hmm.
and I did not learn that like in the state of Georgia.
Okay.
Like they very much whitewashed that, and just to know how much trauma actually was there, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously I only got that because I had the re-education of a Negro at a HBCU, but
Mm-hmm.
it totally makes sense that worldwide we are still suffering because of the amounts of trauma that happened. And then also, maybe can you quickly speak to the differences between HBCU and PWI? Because I also got my MBA at the University of Texas, and it's just a totally different type of thing. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm a
Mm-hmm.
rattler always
Oh,
first.
first and foremost.
Period.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, maybe kind of talk about that, and then some tips for people to kind of make that transition if they want to get their graduate degree at a PWI.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the first question is like my HBCU experience juxtaposed to the PWI and how to get into a PWI grad school or any grad school.
Or just tips and tricks on how to transition as a Black person or a person of color.
Okay, I got you. I got you. So yeah, like I said, there were no fried chicken Wednesdays. There were no set Fridays. It was like the culture. There was no culture, right? Um, And in the South, people more likely, whether they may like you or not, you at least gonna get a head nod. You're at least gonna get some type of acknowledgement. And there's actually she's a social worker as well, Dr. Joy DeGrew. She has a book called Post Traumatic Stress or Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Ooh.
Um, and it's kind of, it was too heavy to really finish, But go look up Dr. Joy DeGruy. She talks about a lot of these things. Um, but nonetheless, going from there, and even like just suppose to, I don't like Florida State, but just suppose to Florida State,
The
yeah,
name.
ill, Florida State, yuck, yuck.
Shout out
Like,
to Stephen Nose.
mm, yeah, I'm not even gonna say that. Anyway, but what I will say is like, at least FSU had us cross the street to be like, all right, let me get away from this, right? You at least have some black people in Tallahassee, right? Now it can depend upon like Southerners, even no matter what, white people will talk to you more so down south than they probably will up here. And it's just like we know their past, we know there's just white supremacy, right? There's anti-racist white people that are still racist, and it's insidious, it's ubiquitous, and who
Yeah.
they are, no matter where they are. But at the same time, they know us more, and it could depend where you are in grad school, just depending on the program and the region, right? If you're gonna go from like anywhere between Florida and like New York, for the most part, there's a huge swath of black people that people really know of. But once you get past New York, like where I'm at in Massachusetts, this place is like Wakanda, you know?
Boston
And
is
just
tough. I
yeah,
was I was there for a week and I was ready to go.
yeah, Boston is we call it the white Atlanta, right? This is where they come from everywhere. If you see black people doing shit, I'm sorry, stuff on the gram, having fun, imagine that type of stuff or whiteness when white people doing the same kind of stuff. That's Boston. And that's why I went to grad school. There's not really the black community is kind of splintered in ways because there's diversity. I'll say that there's diversity, but there's also division because it's like you have our brothers from an island off Africa called Cape Verde. You have our
Hmm.
West Indian brothers. You have our Afro Latino brothers, and you probably have a smaller amount now. Maybe before there was more, but smaller amount of African Americans. So everybody is cultural based upon their country of origin and their family's country of origin. So that's one thing. I will say, like, there are some administrative things at a PWI. Like, I love FAMU. FAMU taught me character, but there's some financial aid things that kind of got messed up, and I'm not here to be on that type of time. But I made it out. And the good thing about that is, like, I was able to use those experiences to
Yeah.
help me in the real world.
Yes.
When I went to financial aid at Boston College, I'm like, all right, I gotta have this ready. I gotta be on time. I gotta be early. I gotta do this. I was in and out in 5 minutes and walking out like, wait, that's it? You just gonna give me my money is early and so I was like, oh, okay, yeah. But that's that. I'll say as far as getting into a grad school program, uh, the late Lyndon Rogers, who had me in like seminar and political science class, he gave me some of the best tips, or our class the best tips. He's like, no matter where you go, find a black church. Because at
Mm.
the black church, you'll either find like the soul food spot, the barbershop. You're able to, well, depending on your sexual orientation, and
Hmm.
hopefully the church is progressive or the place of worship is progressive, you'll be able to find somebody equal spiritual mind and go from there. Also, if you have any friends or if you have any family that are in these places, get to know them. Uh, and always, in general, just network because you never know where you're going to be next. So if you're able to stop here, stop there, maybe get some coffee with somebody and put them up on game about the environments of where you are.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. That's again, it keeps coming up, but social capital is priceless. And we prove that here every day as family. So we have about 4 more minutes. I just want you to take the time to again pub all of your social media and tell us one more time about your podcast and like which days you're on and that we can come support you.
Okay. So I'm about to put in the link our Instagram. And I'm about to put our website as well. Okay.
Okay.
And I mean, generally speaking, if we're in a good space of shooting a lot of different podcasts and stuff, we like every other like Monday for the most part, we actually had two this week. We had two drops. We had one with the Radical Therapy Center from Philadelphia, and then we had one. I'm not going to say the organization, but a social work organization that does not know how to support Black and Brown people, even when they do present. That's another thing too. Like I don't feel like this would be a hostile environment, whether it's a digital space or in the real world, and you're speaking truth to power as a Black person, they're gonna try to crucify you. So the thing is, where you go, like I didn't bring my homies to and be invited here, but going forward, it's best in these places, spaces, especially digitally, bring your folks, and don't even bring all the folks that's in your career. Bring some of your uncles and cousins and them, and come into the chat, because white supremacy is real. And
Hmm.
my name is Josh McNeil. You can follow us at melanatedSocialWork.com. You can follow us on Instagram. Our podcast is on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, Google Play, and we're lit. Like our top 5 cities are Philadelphia, Los Angeles, no, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Minneapolis. I want to see some of those Austin and San Antonio numbers go up. Um, But yeah, like just hit the website. Oh, we also have a lot of different merchandise. We have mugs,
Oh,
we have hats, we have masks, we have even gear for like a dog if you want to put something on a cat. We have more merch coming out. We have just go to the Teespring. We have so much merch. We have people in Australia, Canada, San Diego, Oakland, Seattle, Austin, buying our stuff and posting it on Instagram. You can just even go to the Instagram like hashtag melanated social work.
okay.
You can see all the things, all the
All right,
things.
do it big.
Hmm.
I appreciate your time from Boston to Austin.
You know it.
We will see you in the flesh,
Yes, yes.
here on the ground at South by Southwest. So again, thank you so much for your time. You are greatly appreciated, family. Yes.
Hmm.
Strike, strike, strike. All
Right.
right. So we'll see you around.